The lack of water infrastructure or the poor management of water resources results in water scarcity and affects other sectors of our economy. The South African Water Chamber was established to form a credible, strong link between an organized private sector and government. But where do citizens fit in, and how and why should we hold the custodians of our water resources accountable? Stay tuned as we will talk to Dr. Pulane Molokwane as well as the founders of the South African Water Chamber, Dr. Anthony Turton, Fred Platt, and Benoit Leroy. Don't go away, we will be right back. If you're just joining us, welcome to the Sports Hour. I'm your host, Betsy Vander from Cape Town in South Africa, and this live stream is brought to you by Beehive Media and the South African Water Chamber. This is an audience-centric show, so we are monitoring the comments. If you've got any comments or questions, please feel free to pose those to our panelists. Our panelists today comprises of the founders of the South African Water Chamber, Dr. Anthony Turton, Fred Platt, and Benoit Leroy. Also joining us today as a special guest, Dr. Pulane Molokwane. She's a nuclear physicist, a water and environmental engineering specialist, professional with expertise and experience in groundwater remediation, research into nuclear process and solid waste strategies, solutions, and technologies for petroleum and energy industry. So let's welcome our panelists to the show. And the backdrop to our conversation today is that in a recent survey by the Mail and Guardian, the three biggest issues identified by voters that influence elections are water supply, water cuts, and water availability. In addition to these, the issues relating to sanitation, poor infrastructure maintenance, poor governance, and corruption also highlight the problems faced by residents relating to water. So let's invite our panelists to the show. Pully, Anthony, Fred Platt, and Benoit, welcome to the conversation.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
Great to have you join us. So this is quite a although we don't want this conversation to be about politics, we do have the upcoming elections, and as I mentioned earlier, three of the top priorities in the upcoming elections are water supply, water cuts, and water availability. And so we do want to know who is responsible for what, why, and how should that influence the way people cast their votes in upcoming elections, because that's going to have direct bearing on service delivery. Benoit, I think I'm going to start with you to just give us a little bit of a background to the conversation.
Thanks, Brigitte, and hi listeners, and a special thank you to Pulane for agreeing to be on our our panel. You're our first guest outside the Three Musketeers. So really nice to see you here. And a bit of background, we met Pulane at the National Planning Commission, where Pulane was or is the commissioner for the water resilience. I can't remember the correct words, but I think it's to do with the master plan, resilience, etc., at a national level. And I think what was very important is what was embraced in that very first meeting in the union buildings was that we had failed in our water infrastructure, master planning, resource management, and services and the likes, and that we were looking at how do we have an overarching approach to give us water security so that we can have a thriving economy. And and this was a few years ago, I think in 2019, 18, 19, I never thought that the local elections would have their not top, but top 3 items on the voters' agenda related to basic water services. So I think, from that perspective, what it does selfishly from a water chamber perspective, it really raises the profile of water, where we believe that it is, fundamental to everything else as it cuts across everything. And there's no substitute for water, whereas energy, there's various forms, electricity being one of them. So, I think for us, it's not really a politics discussion. It's a discussion about what people think they should be voting for. And, that their choices are going to be around the basic services of water. And I think, we must never forget sanitation's attached to it. We always tend to forget that. And as in washing hands, was in sewage treatment. So I look forward to the discussion. I know we all have different perspectives, and really good welcome, Pulane, to have you on our show.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks very much for that backdrop to the conversation. Pully, if I can just ask you next to just tell us briefly about yourself and why you think it's important for us to have this conversation right now.
Thanks, Brigitte, and good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to the fellow panelists, and thanks for inviting me. Yes, we met some time back with Leroy, Benoit, and Fred. It's good to see you again. For me, what is key and what has always been at the top of mind, even in my work as a commissioner, was that we have actually failed as a country, and the targets that we have set ourselves up, we have not managed to meet them. And it is very evident when you go to the outskirts of the country, to the rural areas. In fact, things are looking more like they are getting worse. And not to make it political, as you said, but the majority of the voters are actually residing in those areas. And it is important that every councillor, every politician who wants the vote actually talks to those people and make sure that they receive what they deserve. The citizens deserve water and sanitation, but with water, you cannot live without water. Yes, sanitation is dignity, but it is the prerogative of every government to supply water to its citizens as per our constitution. And that's how important it is. And if the next world wars and fights will be about water, why not take it seriously right now before we start fighting over it?
Thanks very much for giving us that backdrop, much appreciated. Anthony, if I can bring you in at this point, we've seen over the last couple of months, and I know you've posted a lot about this, we do see various municipalities are failing. Is this indicative of the weaponization of water? Why is this an important conversation?
Yes, Brigitte, it's very important because municipalities are the front end of our democracy. That is where the average citizen interfaces with the state. This is really where the rubber hits the road in our democracy. And unfortunately, the majority of our municipalities are distressed in some way or other. And there's been such a massive loss of technical skills at municipal level that it's quite mind-boggling to see the unintended consequences of that. And I just give one example of a We're all familiar with the big areas, the Pretorias and Johannesburgs and Cape Towns. We all know about that. But what we're less familiar with is the rural areas or the small towns in South Africa. And I'm working at the moment now in the Port Shepstone area on the Umzimkhulu River, which is an area of extreme crisis at the moment. And the Ugu district municipality is under severe pressure. There's all kinds of protest actions taking place, very often violent protest actions taking place. And there's a range of issues. One of them is water, but there are many other issues as well, potholes and just general service delivery related issues. And what's interesting in this particular context is that very, very grand plans are being proposed. In this particular context, they're talking about building a weir to prevent saline water intrusion up into a pump station at a place called St. Helens Rock. But they fail to understand the core drivers of the problem, the reason why saline water has moved upstream. The pump station is about 9 kilometers inland, and it's moved upstream because of uncontrolled sand mining, and that's altered the bed bank and flow of the river, and it's moved upstream because of a failure of the Department of Water and Sanitation to regulate existing lawful users upstream. So both of these are regulatory issues that are now manifesting at municipal level, and the municipality, because of the lack of skills, they are now starting to put proposals on the table worth hundreds of millions of rands. I mean, very expensive proposals that's going to fundamentally change the ecology of one of the last free-flowing rivers in Africa forever, but without understanding the root cause analysis. So this whole thing about root cause analysis, we've seen this thing playing out in bigger municipalities like Pulane, where to date over 2 billion rand has been spent on the water infrastructure there without any evidence of any progress. 2 billion rand and climbing. Also, no root cause analysis has been done. So I think this highlights the fact that while the municipalities are at the very cutting edge of the interface between the citizen and the state, they are also the place with very often the least amount of technical capacity. And I'd like to say one more thing if I can, and that is that we're seeing far too often now the fact that your municipalities are staffed by officials who do not understand that the changing water service delivery pattern in South Africa is increasingly going to be driven by municipalities with the emergence of independent water producers. And these independent water producers are going to be determined by the understanding that the municipal executive committee has in their willingness to negotiate offtake agreements, etc., because this is what actually makes those entities viable for investment or not. And so this whole changing role of municipalities, I think, is critically important, and particularly in the smaller areas where you've got very dense population of very often very poor people around these very, very poor marginal areas. We have to understand that water is a very important part there in restoring confidence in the area and actually creating sustained economic growth, which is what the PPGI is about.
Thanks very much, Anthony. Fred, I'm not sure if your internet's going to hold, but if it does hold, can we just bring you into the conversation? Tell us a little bit about the South African Water Chamber and what is the difference that you're hoping to make in terms of helping people make smarter choices at the polling station when it comes to water, and why making a smart choice is important?
Thanks, Brigitte. I'm actually sitting in the Kruger Park, so if you do lose me, it's because of where I am. But over the last week, we have seen, just where I'm sitting, that the road between Hazyview and the Kruger Gate has been closed off by communities because of a lack of water infrastructure. And this is an ongoing problem that we're facing around the country. So the questions that we really look at the end of the day is to understand, and I think just to put it into context, that water is the ultimate economic enabler. The lack of water has a major impact in the ability of marginalized communities to develop the economic development opportunities that are presented to them. And also, at the end of the day, you know, water is the single most important decision, I suppose, because it drives, at the end of the day, either development or the continuation of bad spatial planning that was a remnant of the apartheid system. So the question then is, you know, how important is the local government elections in terms of water provision? And what do we do as citizens to hold those elected officials accountable for the delivery of these basic services? Because it's much broader than just providing water. It's about inclusion, it's about development, it's about redressing the challenges that we faced in the past. And it's about giving confidence to business to invest into those communities. It's about, you know, stopping rapid urbanization by giving development within these areas. So it's a critical cornerstone, and as the chamber, we, I believe, have a responsibility to not politicize the issue, but to inform voters that at the end of the day, they have a responsibility in deciding who their elected officials are, and then holding them accountable against the promises and the various manifestos that they present. And in our case, it all revolves around water as the central economic enabler.
Thanks very much, Fred. Benoit, if I could bring you back in again, can you just, you know, for the sake of viewers, what is this landscape of the structure of our water infrastructure look like? Who's responsible for what?
Yes, took the words out of my mouth. I was just thinking about that. It's so important to understand this, especially at the voter level, in that, you know, water service provision is only really visible at a town, village, or city level. And the outages we've had in Gauteng, in all three metros, and specifically Joburg, have been related to two things. And they're actually quite good examples, although they're sad, is that the water distribution network, that where the water is supplied by Rand Water at maximum capacity, is in actual fact failing in Johannesburg and Tshwane, mostly Johannesburg. And what's happening is there's 50, 60 leaks a day, and we used to have less than a third of those this time last year. And that's really due to poor maintenance and infrastructure asset management. The networks are old, and they need not only to be maintained but replaced progressively, you know, over a period of time. Their lifespan is 40, 50 years. We've got 75, 80 years. So what's happening is that is totally in control of local government, as the metros are a water service authority and a water service provider. The water service provider in Johannesburg is Johannesburg Water, and the metro is the water service authority. However, it has no water. It's entirely dependent on Rand Water, and Rand Water can only pump what the sustainable yield is. In other words, what the system from the Vaal, and the Vaal is an integrated Vaal River system. I think it's 14 dams. It's quite complex, but we import the water to this region. And since 2018, Rand Water cannot increase its volume of water because Lesotho Highlands Water Project Phase 2 was supposed to come online, and now is 2028. It's 10 years late. So what's happening is Rand Water is pumping the most it can without affecting the system, and it's pumping actually in excess of its water use license with an agreement with the regulator at the moment. So it cannot pump more. Now, the population growth through urbanization and through new births, but mostly urbanization in Gauteng, is 4%. That's over 1 million every 5 years. Now, so since 2018, we have 4% less water. So next year, we will have 60% less water. And this is why there are restrictions, in that the demand is outstripping the supply from Rand Water. It is outside of Rand Water cannot pump more. Okay, its infrastructure is being upgraded for 2028, when more water is put into the system, or later. It won't be earlier. It's very doubtful it'll be earlier. So I think in my mind, that's probably closer to 2030, although I hope I'm absolutely wrong. So national government owns the water boards like Grand Water and the likes, and national government, the Department of Water Sanitation specifically, is the custodian of our water, which was nationalized in 1998 through the Water Act. So we have two parties at play, and we have the province in the middle, who is really supposed to be the support and the oversight from a water perspective. They have absolutely no power because national government hasn't provided new water. The population has grown, and Gauteng 20 years ago was 7 or 8 million, there's now 15 million people. We don't have more water, and we have crumbling infrastructure. So with these local government elections, we need to hold the local councillors and the council accountable for the water distribution and the pricing thereof. The pricing will stop escalating. But then 2 years later, I think it is, we have the national government elections where we can hold the bulk water service provider, which is national government, accountable for providing the water to feed into the system. So it's quite complicated, but I think these are good opportunities in this crisis to actually make the electorate more aware before the taps run dry, that in actual fact, it's a split responsibility. And I don't think there's a problem in that. It's a matter that it's got to be managed. And local government is independent of national government, although, from a service provision perspective, it's got to collapse before national government can walk in, which we've seen in Pulane and a few other municipalities, and it hasn't helped either. The lack of capacity Tony talks about is at a national level and at a local level. And then if you talk about, where Pulane is involved, for example, in the Pully water, is in the rural outlying towns, the cost of providing water per litre is much higher because you've got a much lower population density, so you've got a big spread of low consumption with big piping and reservoirs and the like, where the economics really work against the system, and that's where the cross-subsidy is supposed to come in from national government. And so if we think we're suffering in the city, the rural people have been suffering a lot more for a lot longer. And in the end, if the economy needs to thrive to lubricate all of these and finance all of these water systems.
Thanks very much for that, Benoit. And I think you're absolutely right, and unfortunately, from what I've observed myself in the last couple of years, is that the people who suffer the most, who are, in the poorer communities, those stories often don't get to mainstream media. And, those people suffer in silence and nobody listens to them. I get tons and tons of SMSs and messages on Facebook from people who say they've got no water. Pully, if I can get you in here, how do you think people in these rural areas could make a difference? What is it that they need to do to get water? How can they make officials sit up and listen to them? Is there anything they can do?
I think our people have done a lot. They have toyed, they've blocked the roads, they've made the noise. It's high time we as the state own up and pull our acts together. I always say to people, the people in the rural areas who do not have water, in my home village there has not been water for over 15 years. And people are kind of used to not having water. If you don't have the 60,000 rands to drill a borehole, it means you are doomed. And it's so sad that people are getting used to walking far or looking for a 2 rands to buy 25 liters of water. I grew up in that village, and I like saying this, and I repeat it, and I'll repeat it. And we used to have running water. What is that was done before that cannot be done right now? Yes, the country is getting drier, but a lot of money is going to wastage. We lose billions of rands to water leaks that cannot be attended to. As a national government, the national government of being the DWS has not implemented literally most of their plans. The reason we have Hartbeespoort and the Val is because we failed to implement what was approved in the form of catchment management agencies, because those are the guardians of our water resources, and we don't have such in this country, or at least we've got only 2. And in those areas, Nobody's actually taking care of things. The other thing that I think we don't even talk about, most of the indigents are actually not registered. The reason most of our municipalities and the smaller ones are not receiving the correct and accurate equitable share is because they are not properly registered. Then I also want to throw something, a spanner in the works. Is it not time we revise the DORA, or by default, the Constitution? We have seen over and over that municipalities are not copying, but we continue to give them money. We continue to give them their allocations, and they still don't do better. And then the National Department has to chip in. Maybe it's a conversation that we need to have some other time, because I honestly think that we cannot continue talking year in, year out. Municipalities are collapsing. They are dysfunctional, but there's nothing that is changing. We are going to vote for them again, and we continue to have them allocated funds, and our people continue to suffer. Shouldn't we be doing better? I mean, I believe the state and the government has got the powers to do everything in their power to make sure that those that needs to be served can be serviced. And those are the people that, they have the bare minimum. Those are the people who are using pit latrines. And those are not the people who flush toilets like me and you in the cities. I mean, can't we do just a little bit for them, a little bit more, so that they can have that communal tap working, and so that we can stop counting the number of taps, but rather count the kiloliters that we give our people.
Thanks very much for that, Pully. Anthony, can I pull you in here? The questions that are coming through here is, why are we seeing this failure from government, and what is required for us to start seeing a change?
Well, I think what Pulane has said now is entirely correct. To me, hearing her words just as a breath of fresh air, that government now is starting to realize that they cannot continue doing things they always have. And, in her case, her village 15 years ago had water, and now it doesn't have water. That's just in one case, and this is replicated across the country. So I think the first thing that I'm starting to see across the country is that people are waking up and realizing that this is a serious matter. The guests on this show have been talking about this for years and years and years. For us, this is not news. This is what we do, for a profession. But for the average person, they really don't understand just how dire the situation really is. And it's difficult when you get up here because you don't want to be a prophet of doom. But we really are pretty much on the edge of the abyss. And if we don't do something fairly quickly, we are going to be in the abyss. So I think we have to start by realizing that we've got to hold officials accountable. But this is said all the time in this sort of piecemeal kind of the knee-jerk action taken. One of the important things is that our legislation is while it's regarded in many ways as world-class, etc., there's been no legal reform for some time, and our legislation, I'm going to argue, is fundamentally flawed. And a couple of levels of flaw that we find in that. And the one, we could talk for hours about this one topic, but just the one flaw I would like to put onto the table today is the Municipal Financial Management Act does not allow for ring fencing of money. So when you pay your general rates and taxes bill, let's say you pay 1,000 Rand of rates and taxes, and 100 of that Rand of that is for water, well, that 100 Rand ends up by paying the mayor's security detail because they want some. So in other words, until such time as we can reform that law, we are not going to ever have any change. So we need to understand that the law matters, the application of the law matters. That's just one aspect of the Municipal Financial Management Act. The other aspect of the Municipal Financial Management Act that needs to change is the fact that your executive decision makers in the municipality, essentially a corporation, but they are not held accountable to the same fiduciary standards that you find in the King Code of Corporate Conduct, for example, where people that are CEOs of stock exchange, of companies listed on the stock exchange, are held to a different standard. That's also unacceptable. So we in the council have been working on that, and we understand that problem very deeply. So by way of solutions, I think we are clearly seeing a collapse of the municipalities, and we are likely to see an accelerated collapse of that. So we have a solution ready for implementation now, with approval of the Treasury, with approval of the National Planning Commission, with approval of DBSA, etc. And that's this notion of a special purpose vehicle. And that special purpose vehicle, I think, is going to be almost like the cavalry that can come in to save the soldiers at the Battle of Wounded Knee, or whatever our local equivalent of that thing is. We need the cavalry to come in now. And that cavalry's got to be able to make a meaningful difference. And with these special purpose vehicles, two things happen. Well, three things actually happen. The first thing that happens is that your National Municipal Financial Management Act is the gaps left here by the Act are taken care of. So the one gap that's sorted out is the ring fencing of the money for stated purpose. That is sorted out by the special purpose vehicle. But the second critical thing that's sorted out by the special purpose vehicle is that it brings commercial law in to block the holes left by the Municipal Financial Management Act. So your executive decision makers in your special purpose vehicle are now held to the same international fiduciary standards that a director of a company listed on the stock exchange would have. So those are very, very important things. And then the third thing that a special purpose vehicle brings about as an immediate short-term solution is that it enables capital to flow into highly capital constrained municipalities. Remember, all of your municipalities are so financially bankrupt, for want of a better word, that they are unable to enter into commercial negotiations or arrangements with financial institutions. They simply are not regarded as bankable. And this is an important issue, because private capital is going to very soon be needed, and without the special purpose vehicle, you can't get access to that private capital. So I think by way of solution thinking, we're going to see a rapid rollout in the near future. And I welcome the work that's done by Pulane and her team in trying to champion this notion that that we can't do things the way we've always done them. We have to reform. We have to do things differently, and we have to ultimately hold people accountable. So there's actually quite a lot of good news in a green shoots kind of way that's coming out of this space, and I think that we are going to start seeing the turnaround. The one other thing I'd like to just say is that the policy changes that we're starting to see now about independent service providers, independent producers. So either independent power producers in the energy sector, or independent water producers in the water sector. That's also a critically important element by way of solution, because that's going to start opening up the door to a whole range of different solutions that are currently not available within the water sector. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Anthony. So if I heard you correctly, when I get my water account, just for people who are listening, when I get my water account, there's a separate line on the water account that says, this is for water and sanitation and for sewage. So are you saying that money isn't specifically allocated to water?
No, that money is paid into the general account of the municipality, and that it gets lost. There's no more accountability. So in other words, when it comes to recapitalizing the upgrade of your pipelines or of your infrastructure, there's no capital available. And that's being used as a cash cow. If we get into the politics of it now, the politics of patronage are really all about how to pilfer the public purse. And this is just unacceptable. We can't carry on like this. If we carry on like this, we're going to end up in a full-blown failed state. So that is why I'm so proud to be part of the Water Chamber, because the Water Chamber is really trying its very, very best to stand between the general public and the edge of the abyss I talk about. We are really trying there to put solutions on the table, to bring consensus about what needs to be done differently, but to put actual, genuine, legally viable solutions. And for me, any solution has got to meet three standards. It's got to be technically feasible, it's got to be socially and therefore politically acceptable, and it's got to be economically viable. Those three standards have to be met. And we can meet those standards. If we don't meet those standards, then to answer your question fully now, no, your 100 Rand out of your 1,000 Rand levy that you pay to the local authority, that gets lost in a bottomless pit. So therefore, they will always say they don't have enough money for the upgrading of infrastructure. There's not enough for O&M, for operations and maintenance, and that's why we have the problem we have today.
Wow, that is quite shocking. I don't think the average person was aware of that, because when you get your accounts, my thinking would be, well, if that is for water, that's going to the water infrastructure to ensure that I get my water supply. Pully, what needs to change? What needs to change for us to see a real difference?
By the way, even the equitable share that is meant for water and energy goes to salary, to that very same bottomless pit. So I think money should start going to where it's supposed to go. And if people don't make profits, whether in municipalities or wherever, then they should not be paid. They can't be paid with money that is meant for the services of our people and for the well-being of our people. The issue about water is that it goes deeper than just water for drinking. It affects your health. It affects your food security. It affects the energy sector. So the ripple effect of a mismanaged water sector is dire, and it cannot be ignored. And I think what is really good is that the private sector is coming to the party. As Benoit said, I'm currently busy at Lepelle, and we see the interest and the appetite from the private sector to partner with the state to help develop some projects, because it is also in their interest. But what we do sometimes, and we don't do well as a state, is that money ends up going elsewhere, not to the real infrastructure. And I think we have learned before. We have made mistakes. Can we really do something better? If we get that CSI and the contribution from the private sector, let's use it fruitfully to develop the economy, to create jobs. Since I've been new there, I've been making trips around all the local municipalities, and the Limpopo province is a relatively poor has got a lot of rural neighborhoods, and the people don't have water. Some people get water 2 days a week, not even for the whole day. Some people don't get water for the whole week. 5 of the villages actually had to go to court to force the municipality to provide them water at least once or twice a week. It's bad. The city of Molokwane has actually put a moratorium on development, that there will be no new development because the water is not enough. And it's, of course, we are a water scarce country, but some of the water just goes into wastages. There's no proper maintenance of infrastructure. I think I've spoken about the billions that we lose that goes to water. In one of the municipalities, we did a study. We have got a 30 megaliter per day plant. Our numbers are showing us that water is able to supply all the 159 villages, but it can't. They are only getting water twice because it disappears in the system. So we really need to start fixing our infrastructure that has dilapidated, that is, in quote, being vandalized, and those that are using water need to start paying, because there are also those that are taking a lot of water and they are not paying for it. So all those little things that we can do, they can really bring back a whole lot of billions and kickstart the economy. There are so many mines who are waiting to start mining, but they can't start because there's no access to water.
Thanks, Pully. So, Anthony, I just want to ask you quickly, are we looking at purely a management problem here, or is it a management and infrastructure problem? And then, Benoit, I want to switch over to you and just talk a little bit about, in some municipalities, we've now seen the private sector taking over water and battles with the court. Is that the way to go for the future? Yes, no? So, Anthony, you first.
Yes, okay. So is it a management issue? Absolutely. Because management really is about all of the stuff. Management is about planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. So if you're a municipal manager, then part of your portfolio is you've got a book of assets under your control, and those assets have all got a lifespan. So you've got a road that's at a certain lifespan, you've got electrical cables, you've got a lifespan, you've got pipes and sewage works, and all have a lifespan. And part of the core function of the municipal manager must be to plan in terms of the life cycle of each of those pieces of infrastructure, whatever's needed to be replaced over time. So you have to budget and allocate. Just like you budget for your car, when you do your household budget, you have to put a certain amount away for what happens if you get a flat tire of your car, or when are you going to replace the tires on your car. You don't do that every day. You do it maybe once every 3 to 5 years, but you have to plan for it accordingly. Now, this is what is not being done. So therefore, because things are not being planned for, we are running all of our infrastructure way out of its life cycle's design phase. So we're running pumps into the ground. We're running pipes. If you look at many of the large pipes that are providing very high pressure water, they also at the end of their design life, and they start growing, they start popping all over the show. So everything's got a design life, and that comes down to budgeting, and that comes down to asset management, and that comes down to a financial management capability. But the international, the connection, the nexus, if you like, between engineering, asset management, and financial management, financial planning, and budgeting. That all comes together ultimately under management. So part of it is we've just lost our management capacity in municipalities. They just simply don't get managed. And I get back to my little case of Port Shepstone again. Ugu, sometimes I get a month, get a bill for the month. Sometimes 3 months later, I might get a bill for the last 2 months that they didn't send out, etc. So the whole billing crisis that many people know about is all part and parcel of the absence of management and planning, and the absence or the inability to put systems in place, management control systems, financial management systems, accountability system. That's all about business processes, all about management at the end of the day. So that's really our absolute critical service, our critical bottleneck. We've put people in positions of decision-making authority with fiduciary roles, and people that are patently and hopelessly unqualified for that, and there are no systems of checks and balance for them. So therefore, they just plunder the system, and it's a bottomless pit. They just take it until there's no more money left, and then you can't upgrade. So really, ultimately, it's a management problem.
Thanks very much for that, Anthony. Benoit, who does the buck stop with when it comes to this sort of thing? Ultimately, there must be responsibility for this wide-scale failure that we're seeing in all the municipalities all over the country. And we've seen the private sector take over in some municipalities. Is that the answer?
Well, the buck stops with us. We get the government we deserve. And we must have done something wrong, all 60 million of us, because we are really scraping the barrel at the moment, And so no apologies there. But, really, we quick to do certain things. So, but why haven't we been quick with water? And water is a slow onset disaster. The taps don't go off all of a sudden. It's a slow thing. Whereas electricity will load shed you this, and you can use a gas generator, a candle, or if you can't afford it, bake a fire to cook or whatever the case is. With water, it's a little bit different. The problem with water is it takes 50 years to recover. It's not, you can't put an IWP in 2 years like an IPP for energy. So the buck stops with us, and I think the rule of law is very important, and what Tony's talking about, governance issues. But we have allowed our councillors and our councils and the mayoral committees to not put the right amount of attention and management and governance into the water sector and into its asset management. What's happened is lower courts like in Costa felt sorry, and because what they did was illegal, and I'm on record in saying that, is they said to the residents, take over. The municipality had the cheek to uphold the rule of law. All of a sudden it found a conscience and went to the Supreme Court or the High Court, and of course won its case, because there the legal fraternities, the judges, the High Court judges, said this is the law, and you can't You can't make somebody a water service provider, water service authority. Water service authority is in the Constitution, in the Water Act, the Municipal Infrastructure Act, and that is the district municipality or the metro. So in that Costa area, it's a district municipality. You cannot change it without changing the Constitution. The Water Service Authority can appoint a water service provider, but that has to go according to supply chain management rules. In other words, tenders and all that, because it's public money, it didn't do that. So that's why I'm on record saying with the media that that was not legal. Now, people are frustrated and get upset with me for saying it's not legal because two wrongs don't make it right. So we've got to reinstate the rule of law. And if we reinstate the rule of law, and if we make sure that the rule of law is abided to, then we can force governance and all the likes and amend the legal system as we go along. So, marching at Rand Water's head office because Joburg Water can't give you water, because Joburg's infrastructure is not operating, doesn't. So we've got to be able to, and I know it's difficult for the average citizen to realize which door to knock on because it's a complex system. Okay, so in places that have lots of water, and this is the crux of it, is it's normally the little town or village is the Water Service Authority, and it is responsible for its water resource, which is generally speaking groundwater and not dam water. They don't rely on rain every season, and what happens is you get a bill in France, for example, rural areas once a year. End of the year, you pay your bill. And the little towns, you get every quarter and things like that. And what happens is within the council, there's a regulator. It works because the residents know who lives where and they know which door to knock on. In South Africa, we don't. So, I think our electoral system is fatally flawed. As Pulane says, the Constitution is flawed. And but what we must be very careful of is centralizing power. I believe in decentralizing power. So what we need to do is change the water architecture and legal framework to give more power to the local authorities, but we have to have competent people and be able to the legal system to hold them to account. And I think that's where the Constitution is not optimal and needs to be adapted. Now, we can't wait 5 years to change that. So we need to move along in the National Infrastructure Plan 2050, which hopefully will pass Cabinet muster later on this week, talks to these things and starting to decentralize, but also national government to support local government in inculcating water security with the private sector. So I think the issue is acknowledged, and I think that we are going to see major changes through the NIP 2050, which is really a subset of 4 priorities, which water is one of them, of the National Development Plan.
Thanks very much, Benoit. And Fred, if your internet signal holds, perhaps I can pull you in here. Apart from the citizens having the power at the polling stations in upcoming elections to vote or to make an educated vote, in terms of changing the landscape of water as it is now, how can the private sector make a difference? What can they do?
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's 2 things. The first thing to understand, and I think you opened up with the statement that the Mail and Guardian has done a survey and said the top 3 issues relate to water. But when you listen to the political parties talk, they're not talking to what the citizens are looking for. So, I was driving down the road the other day in 4 ways, and there's a big poster up from a political party, and they're dealing with an issue of international relations about a country or that they support in the local elections. So we're allowing, firstly, the debate to be moved into a politicized area in the local elections, as opposed to holding the parties accountable to the bread and butter issues. It's about water. It's about power. It's about the potholes. It's about service delivery. It's about how are we going to structure it? What are you going to do? How are you going to change? How are you going to deliver, etc., etc. From the private sector perspective, at the end of the day, the private sector is willing and able to participate. But I think it's important to understand it's neither neither party, neither government nor the private sector can do it on its own. So the debate is not about nationalization or privatization. It's about how do we put a structure together that allows for private sector participation in unlocking what is an incredible opportunity and will lead to unlocking the economic growth within our economy. So what we need to look at is we need to look at that interface. And I think Pully spoke about the challenges that we have in terms of the legislative framework. And we need to say, fine, where, and if it means we've got to look at the Constitution, if it means we've got to do whatever, we've got to do it quickly. Because as you know, I think there is so much goodwill in this country. But if we allow the politics to cloud the local government election, we will never get to the core issues. And that's why it's so important to kind of undress the T-shirt and say to your councillor, take the T-shirt off and tell me, what are you going to do? How are you going to deliver? What is your plan? And we're going to hold you accountable to that. And that is also where the practitioner needs to take the initiative in terms of getting organized, getting involved, coming up with plans and supporting government. And obviously we need the reciprocal support from government. And that's really where the business chamber operates and extends its hand to government to say, we're here to take your hand and to make a success. I just think it's important that if this country fails, and Tony has spoken, and Pully has spoken, Benoit has spoken about the potential disaster. If the country fails, we all fail. It's not one political party or another that will fail. It's not, we fail as an economy. And that's why it's in our interest to say, what can we do? How can we get involved? And let's change the debate. Let's change the narrative. When the politicians come and they want to talk about whatever it is and whatever the political issue, bring them back to the core issues, which is, how are we going to address the water infrastructure? What are the plans? How are we going to hold you accountable?
Thanks, Fred. Pully, if I can pull you in on this one, it would seem to me that accountability is a problem top down. So if the people on top are not being held accountable, filtering all the way down to the municipalities and managers and infrastructure, how do we change this accountability culture that we've got? Is that a problem? Are there any other challenges that you think voters should be aware of?
It is a problem. I believe that as voters should also vote with a bit of self-care and being selfish about themselves to a certain extent. I don't understand why some councillors are voted in year in, year out, and still where they reside and their people's lives are not improved. I mean, they can't even give you a number to call Eskom when you have load shedding or there's something has tripped in your village, and they still remain councillors. And I mean, I'm talking about villages, and I use my home village as an example because I just think that people sometimes like Benoit said, we get the government that we deserve. Let's make them accountable. If you don't deliver, we'll not vote you in. And I think the more the tone of accountability is harsher from the top, the better it will work down there. And I think probably what we need to do, which is something that is being talked about lately, I hope it will be implemented, is that we will not have councillors and mayors and premiers that do not have the minimum qualifications or prerequisites. I hope that will make a difference, because I think some councillors and some leaders don't understand what accountability is. I think they really don't appreciate that, but maybe it's because we just choose and vote for Pulane because we like her, not because she has done something or she is able to perform or she's able to do something. you find a CFO who's not even an accountant, has not even done a one-day course in accounting, not even the one for accounting for non-accountants that you can do in 3 hours. At some, So we need to really our people, our leaders, our councillors.
Another thing that crossed my mind while listening to you is, I always look at the advertisements for municipalities when they appointing people. They have a salary scale, so it seems that it's not performance based. So whether you perform or you don't perform, that's going to be your salary scale. Should we be looking at more at the importance of performance, especially in terms of something like water? If you don't deliver, why should you get paid? And is that maybe one of the reasons why people are getting away with it?
I guess if you know that nothing's going to happen to you, you just continue as normal. So it doesn't hit in your pocket. Your children don't go hungry. You wouldn't be bothered.
Exactly. So Benoit, if I can bring you in here, bringing it back to the South African Water Chamber, what are the things that the chamber is doing, and what difference are you hoping to make in terms of changing legislation?
I think what's I harp a lot on the NIP 2050, National Infrastructure Plan 2050, because that's the latest gazetted draft policy. Really, it's an agglomeration of where we should go with key infrastructure, and water being one of the four. And the language is our language, government and the water chamber, so the private sector's language. Independent water producers, independent water regulators, private sector participation as opposed to triple Ps, but also highlighting the non-revenue water, the water reuse and desalination of both acid mine drainage and of seawater. So we're talking the same language, and it flows through from the National Development Plan down to the NIP 2050. Now, using the NIP 2050, that has to be gazetted. If it isn't, we will have to start lobbying again, and a lot stronger and quite forcefully. But I believe it's common sense, and I believe there's a lot of common sense at the moment in cabinet. It wants to stay in power, so it is listening to us, going to have to listen to us. And I think that's the blueprint for going forward, because what it has that other documents don't have. They talk about in NDP, it's a 10-year program or 20-year, etc. This is what happens next year, the year after, etc. So independent water producers are independent water regulator first next year, then the producers from 2023. We're going to hold government accountable to that. And we're going to do that at a national level. And then the question is, how do we do that? How do we bridge that to local government? Because there's quite a big connection between, let's say, rolling out the national policy down to a local government level. So from that perspective, I think our biggest job is going to be using the NIP 2050 to connect from the top down to the bottom, so that the bottom can respond to the top, and we can get our water security our master plan for water sanitation on the go, because it's not on the go. The only projects that are being looked at are the projects of 5, 10, 15 years ago. Talking about the new projects. There are a string of them in feasibility studies, and quite a few where they've been finished at the moment. So the pipeline is filling up. And so we're going to use the NIP 2050 as, let's say, as the skeleton, as the blueprint for going forward. And it's fairly fluid. So in other words, everybody, I think we need to accelerate it. And one of the things the chamber has asked is we don't want to have measurements of what we're going to do in 10 years' time for 2050. We want it in political cycles of 5 years maximum. So yearly measurements agglomerated or aggregated into a 5-year thing. So we will vote you out if in 5 years you haven't done this. But if in national elections in 2 years' time we see it's not happening, we'll vote you out. Okay, that's got to be. It's not a threat. That's the way democracy works. And that's got to be what's on the table. If we don't do what we said we would do, we will be voted out. We will be replaced. And I think at local government, we're going to see a lot of replacements happening now, okay? And that's going to be purely because people are not happy, and it looks like water is going to be the swinger of note. We're going to do that for the national elections, and I see we're going to see, let me tell you, we're going to see civil servants, government officials, and politicians running around, hopefully with us holding their hands, sorting out the NIP 2050. So for us, that's really the blueprint of going forward.
We've kind of reached the top of the hour, so if we can just have a sort of final closing comments from each of you. If you could just sort of summarize what it is that you would like voters to know so that they can make an informed choice at the polls. Can we start with you, Anthony?
Muted.
Okay. I think it's important that voters must realize that this is not a hopeless situation. There's actually quite a lot of good news out there. The fact that we now have got an increasingly savvy population, they start to realize what the issues are. And I'm starting to see politicians actually running scared. That's what I'm starting to see. And we saw in July 2021 that the state is failing and the state has left a vacuum behind. And we saw that vacuum left by a failing state has been filled by a vibrant civil society. So this is all good and healthy. I think that we are in a young democracy, and yes, we've gone astray and we've made some mistakes, but I don't think it's hopeless by any stretch of imagination. I think we must believe in ourselves. And why should we as citizens deserve anything but the very best form of government? Why should we be willing to accept a degradation of services, a loss of services? How can that be progress? This is just unacceptable. But I think it's a good news story at the end of the day. Back to you.
Thanks very much. Fred, can I just have a summary from you? What is it that you want voters to know so that they can make an informed choice?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what Tony has said. It's really about, it's about being proud in our country. It's taking pride, but it's also taking responsibility, and it's not giving up, but it's holding accountable, and it's getting engaged. We need an engaged citizenry that says, listen, we understand there's been problems, but here we are, and we're going to get involved, but we're also going to hold you accountable.
Excellent. Pully, can I have a final word from you? What is it that you want citizens to know?
I think what I would like our citizens to know is that in the last few years, we have demonstrated a bit of an improved active citizenry. And that's what we call it in Chapter 13 of the NDP. And it should only be better, and it should grow and increase, because this is the only message that our leaders, our councillors are going to understand, and they should hold them accountable. There's no other two ways. It cannot be correct that we should accept that our kids should still drown in pit latrines. It should not be acceptable. Not almost 3 decades post-democracy. That should not be the case. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And then a final word from you, Benoit. What would you like voters to know?
Please vote for water security.
I think that's kind of a very good summary. Vote intelligently and vote for voter security. And again, I just want to. This was quite an education for me, and I think from the comments that I've seen, a lot of people need to know that that the money that you pay for your water is not, strictly speaking, going to water infrastructure. So hold our officials accountable, contribute to change, because if we don't change, nothing's going to change. If we remain quiet, remain silent, it means we're accepting the current status quo. Get educated, ask the right questions. Ask your councillor, what are you going to do for me so that I can have water, and that we can move away. As Pully said, we should not at this point still be having pit latrines. It is absolutely unacceptable. by any standards. Gentlemen and Pulane, thank you so much for your contribution today. Much appreciated, and hope we can we'll see you back soon on the Water Hour.